José Torres is an expert in destination branding. In other words, he specializes in sending people to difficult places. How's that?
That's good.
He and his Madrid-based company, Bloom Consulting, are actually working with the Abraham Path to help us discover our own brand potential. And Jose, I'm wondering if we're looking somewhere over the rainbow, or as your talk is, are we trying to brand the impossible? Jose.
Thank you. Every time I see how Hungary is dealing with the refugee crisis and how the whole subject is being treated, or every time I see a reporter in that specific country, I'm building a perception about the country. And even if I don't agree with Viktor Zorgan's policy, definitely what's going on the country, and whenever you think about Hungary, and what's the actions and activities that they're doing is building a perception about that place. On the contrary, when you see other countries on how they're behaving, you also create a perception of what's going on. And when you look at how other countries love this country and how powerful this image is, it really shows a lot. And you build a perception on what's going on. So much that even the Germans, I don't know, this is German, so I don't know if they are having a sense of humor or not, but still, it is really creating a great perception about the place. Now the question is, what is this all about? How will these perceptions influence the country, and in what way? There's 5 dimensions where the place brand, or the region brand, or the country brand has a direct impact. And in these 5 dimensions that we call them, you have 5 different stakeholders that are looking and creating a perception that we call a central idea about any given place. So a central idea is what you think about that place. And what these stakeholders think about a certain place will have a direct impact, a transactional and non-transactional impact. The ones most interesting and most easy to understand is, for instance, the transactional impact is tourism. So if you like a place, if you have a good perception, it conveys something, you have a good central idea, you want to go to that place. So it has an economic, direct, intangible impact. And this central idea is established through a behavior, like actions, activities, and policies. That is what this is all about, and I'll just give a practical example. I'm going to give you the example of New Zealand. New Zealand's central idea and the strategy that they've worked for is purity. That is, if we could define in one word what is New Zealand, it's purity. So of course, all their actions, activities, and policies around these 4 areas are aligned under this idea. So of course, when we talk about tourism, they're going to talk about nature. They're not going to talk about nightlife. So everything is aligned. And so you behave in a way that all the actions, activities, and policies are aligned with this central idea. Then you actually build, and then the press talks about this, and then you build a perception about the place. When we talk about other countries, for instance, like Spain, probably the central idea for Spain, and specifically for tourism, is fun. Make no mistake, maybe it was not done on purpose, but rather, if Spain did it or tried to do this or not, it doesn't matter. I mean, if you don't control your place brand, your country brand, others will, and they will build this perception, either you like it or not. So, because of everything that happens in Spain is, it's fun, and it's the nightlife, and it's the bullfighting, well, for some. And then there's some wine, and football, and then you have this perception of fun, which is very well established in this tourism dimension. However, when Spain wants to attract a foreign direct investor, he cannot say that, right? Because the investor is going to just say, so what are you going to do with my money? It's just going to go in a huge party, So definitely the perception of fun for investors is probably not the most strategic for the country. So sometimes countries and places have to work on these dimensions and find central ideas for these different dimensions. And when we talk about these central ideas, again, through the actions, activities, and policies, you have different kinds of perceptions. You have the positive perceptions, and of course, countries like Sweden help a lot. I mean, it's easier to work with countries that have good perceptions, and when you have goods, and when you have goodwill, it's much easier. Then it starts to get a little bit more tricky when you have countries that have no perceptions. I mean, Tajikistan. what's there, you know, I don't know. Or even negative perceptions like currently what Hungary is doing to their brand. And then you even have another perception which is much more complicated than that, which is the fear perception. And the fear perception is one of the most difficult ones to overcome, specifically on tourism. And I think it's very important in this conversation about tourism. When you say, when a tourist perceives a place as unsafe, extremely unsafe, their life is in danger, it's very difficult to overcome. And that's what happens, for instance, with Rocinha, which is a slum in Rio de Janeiro, which is a place that desperately needs tourism, but they could not attract, and they cannot attract the place people to go because they are afraid to die. So they don't go. And you cannot overcome that until you can. And suddenly, Rocinha, because of a shift in the behavior, it's not 100% secure and safe. Because of this shift, it started to attract tourism. And it's one of the most remarkable aspects when we talk about branding difficult destinations. How can a place like this have actually the appeal for tourists and overcome the fear effect? We'll go into that. Now, let's talk about probably, and I don't want to exaggerate, but I think you agree with me, probably the perceived fear region, or the most perceived fear region in the world is probably the Middle East. I mean, for tourists, they perceive this as one of the most difficult or one of the most dangerous places to go. And specifically, if I talk about Israel and Palestine, I'm also not exaggerating. They don't know what's going on. And why do they have this fear? Well, because of the press and because there's a conflict and because on average, 750 people die from both sides, Israel and Palestine, every year on this conflict. So the press really builds this, and there's a perceived notion of fear about these places. But if I compare with the US, the number of people that die with a firearm, I think it's most dangerous for me to come to the United States as a tourist than if I would go, for instance, to any place in Palestine and Israel. So can a place brand work on the perceptions and revert the perspective of fear? Can we build a project on where branding actually creates and destroys this perception? And the answer is absolutely not. We can't. Branding, as much as we say this is beautiful, this special, this culture, there's on, people will not come because they're afraid. But a movement can. A movement is the thing that can actually revert that perception, because a movement will put that place on the map, will put the spotlight of what's going on, and a movement is what actually will shift the perception of what people think and start to revert that perception of fear. It's all about a movement. And when you have a movement that is done by the people and together with the people, I mean, who does not want to engage in that? Everybody wants to be part of that. And then you start with the locals. You start working with internationals after, because I want to be part of that. And I want to be part of this new movement. So how to create a movement that involves both sides, Israel, Palestine, that actually is from the people in one common agenda, that actually will show this shift in the perception and will start to show there's something different going on there. And the answer to that is, I have no idea. I really don't know. But one thing is for sure, a movement is exactly that. It's a movement. Is you start with the move. You start with walking. And as history tells us, and when you look at all the pictures, always everyone is on the move. They're going somewhere. There's an emotion going towards there. So this movement and this initiative is already taking place. That's what's the beauty about this. It's already taking place. People are already walking and joining this movement by the form of walking. So every time a person walks in the Abraham path, it's kind of a statement. They're making a statement of, I want something different. And that's what the Abraham path is all about. It's built for that, so that it's a place for people to make their statement. And we start with the locals, not just with internationals. But even if the internationals do not and cannot, because they're afraid at the initial steps, this can take you everywhere, anywhere in the world. And our job to conclude is this, is how can we brand the movement? How can we show to the world that there is a shift, that the local population is looking for something different? You brand the movement, you brand the place. Thank you very much. Thanks.
Questions for José? How come you didn't have the answers?
I think William wants.
Yes, okay. William has a question.
Great.
Thanks.
Thank you. I love the idea of a movement. I think that's brilliant, and I think it is absolutely what the Abraham Path is. How involved do you get with the media, or do you just let things happen and then invite them to observe? And obviously, now and again, there's going to be bad press, and so how do you just manage all that?
I think there's one thing that is like, we have to acknowledge that it is what it is. It's one of the things. We cannot hide it, we have to face it, we have to talk about it. But like I said, everything has to be done into perspective. I mean, the chances of me dying in the US from a firearm are higher than if I go to Palestine today, or to Israel today. So I think the way that the press, I mean, you cannot control the press. It's impossible to control the press, and sometimes they are most focused on the negative things and the positive things. Even if you talk about the positive, there's 200 times more. So like David Landis said, a sentence that I like very much, which is that really changed the perceptions. Like, it's a place where wars are seasonal. It's like, it really shocked me when he said, like, wars are seasonal? I mean, summer is seasonal, you know? Like tourism, he said, but wars are seasonal? And this really made a different shift. It's like, okay, we have to play with this. So it's about, if you have this movement, if you have the people, the normal people, not the extremes, that it's the majority of the people that are local people against it. And if they rebel by walking, the press will cover that. So it's a question of collective movement and together creating that, together create that perception, and the press will follow. Thanks.
José will be here during our next break
Yes.
to answer more questions.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.